Taj Mahal. That's an example of Mughal architecture. That is an example. Akbar the great Mughal emperor. But the British will get more and more involved when the Mughal Empire uh, declines. And what you're going to see is um, more and more involvement in colonization of India. India will be known as the jewel of the crown of the British colonial empire. Now, it's also going to lead to the end of the East India Company because in 1857, sepoys, which were Indian soldiers used by the British, and these are both Hindu and Muslim, are going to lead a nationalistic revolt against the British. It fails, but it actually got the Indians and Muslims in India together to oppose the British, and that's going to last through to 1947 when the English do leave. So there is, again, an important part of this history that people should know is that the English were involved in India. They should know about the Sepoy Rebellion, that nationalistic uprising, and carry that over to 1947 with the partition and a number of the issues that go on in India and Pakistan today that are the result of English colonization. And again, it makes for a good debate, a good discussion, because, what were maybe, again, people don't like to say this, but there might have been some positive aspects of British colonization and certainly some very negative aspects of British colonization. So again, it makes for a great discussion. That's a great essay topic to use in a side hustle that I have. What were the positives and negatives of English colonization of India? And then which side outweighs the other? It's a great question. But again, you got to understand the English involvement in India to understand all the issues that are going on today with the partition and the three wars between India and Pakistan. If we pretend the East India Company didn't exist, then it's kind of hard to accurately talk about the Sepoy Rebellion and Indian nationalism and the issues that happened after the partition after 1947. The same goes for China. East India Company, England wants to trade for tea. Chinese under the Qing at that point. Now, Qing, Qing, not Qin, which was Shi Huangdi in the beginning. Now, let's also remember this. This is also important for the story. The Qin dynasty, the Qing dynasty, last dynasty of the Chinese, is not Chinese. They were invaders from Manchuria. The Qing dynasty is Manchurian. They were not liked by the Chinese population. If you watch any old kung fu movies or you see any pictures from this time period, you see the Chinese men are forced to wear that braid, what they call the queue. That was a sign of subservience to the Qing. That was not something that the Chinese wanted to do. So, as much as the Chinese might not like the English being there, other Europeans, and they certainly didn't like them being there, they hated the Qing as much, if not more. That's an important part of this story that also needs to be discussed. This doesn't mean they were happy that they were being colonized by the British, or what's going to end up happening is what we call spheres of influence, where there'll be a British sphere, a German sphere, even a Japanese sphere. But they also hated just as much, if not more, the Qing dynasty. So when the Qing dynasty, which had an isolationist foreign policy, refused to trade with England, they're going to start importing opium into China. And that's going to lead to the First Opium War, 1839, which the English win very easily. And that opens up China for imperialism by not just the British, and in the case of the British, the taking of Hong Kong, but again, unequal treaties and spheres of influence with other European nations as well as Japan. And again, that's all, you can put that blame on, partially you can put some of that blame on the East India companies and the British policies there. Now, in another important part of this story that we should include, and it involves opium, and it involves the British. And again, if we don't talk about East India Company, we might not fully understand this part of the story, is something called the Taiping Rebellion. Taiping Rebellion is something many people in the West don't know. It was a civil war in China. In the end, like 50 million people are dead from this civil war. Terrible civil war. In Chinese politics, in Chinese history, there's something called the dynastic cycle, the mandate of heaven. A weaker dynasty is replaced by a newer, stronger dynasty. In this case, the Qing, the Manchurians, were on their way out. The Taiping were on their way in. Now, there's a whole religious aspect of the Taiping and some connections to Christianity. That's a whole other story. But the bottom line is the Taiping were going to overthrow the Qing. And that's part of the natural dynastic cycle. That's the way things worked. And how Chinese history might have been different had the Qing dynasty fallen and been replaced by a newer, fresher, stronger dynasty, the Taiping. That might be a complete game changer. But one of the things the Taiping Rebellion decided to do was, in the territories they took over, they outlawed opium. And then you know who that brings in. The British will come in because this is now potentially messing up their opium trade. Now keep in mind, at this point, the Taiping had control over most of southern China, a lot of places. And in 1860, the British will send in Chinese Gordon, the famous general, to help train Qing soldiers, along with help of the British, to put down the Taiping Rebellion. The Taiping Rebellion, again, going by the old mandate of heaven, which had affected things in China for a very long time, the Qing dynasty would have fallen, and the Taipings would have been in charge, and things might have changed. Instead, the Qing stay in, things are going to get worse. You're going to get eventually what's known as the Boxer Rebellion, which is very similar to the Sepoy Rebellion, and it's a nationalistic revolt against colonialism, imperialism. Also important in the Boxer Rebellion is it was also against Chinese Christians. You'll have the Boxer Rebellion, and then shortly after that, you're going to have Sun Yat-sen overthrowing the Qing dynasty, trying to establish a democracy. That doesn't work. He's overthrown. You're going to end up with a chaotic warlord period. And then you get the rise of the nationalists, and then the split between the nationalists and the communists, and a terrible Chinese civil war that ultimately leads to the communists taking over, and all the things that happened once the communists took over China. A lot of that might not have happened if the English weren't just looking to preserve their opium and they had let the Taiping do their thing. So again, I hope this video did not come across as in any way trying to defend what the East India Company did, or in any way defending colonialism, or in any way taking away from the horrors of the slave trade. What I am trying to do is just give you some historical background on this theme, why it's important, and why, in my opinion, it makes a good discussion point. I think there's a lot of things in history that happened as a result of the East India Company and things that happened in the Indian Ocean, and I think people would be better off to learn about it and then make their own decisions about the theme of the game, but not just the theme of the game, but just in a better understanding of history and what happened. And again, I'm not here to tell you what to believe or not to believe, but I would love if someone played this game and then actually researched one of these topics more, or a bunch of these topics more. And I don't think you can do that if you just kind of cancel the theme. But if this theme bothers you, say you've done the research and this theme bothers you, then don't support it. Don't buy it. Don't buy the game. No one's going to force you to. There are thousands of games out there. Don't buy the game. That's what I say. But again, if you're interested in this theme, I think you might want to dig deeper. Maybe you play this game and you're interested in some of the impact. It's not just things on a map. Again, I can show you on the map Malacca and what's today Malaysia, yeah, it's on a map, but it affects real people. Again, Mrs. Ornstein, a lot of, things that happened, in her life and her growing up, there was a big impact on her education and her upbringing because of what happened in this time period. So again, I do enjoy historical theme games for that. And, you know, again, I just wish board gaming would be a little more consistent if we're going to be, trying to not have games with historical themes because of certain history being problematic, then just be consistent with it across the board. And again, not justifying bad behavior with other bad behavior, but again, don't tell me that it's okay to have a game about the Ottoman Empire and it's not okay to have a game about something else. And again, the Ottoman Empire, look at the Armenian genocide. Look at how they kidnapped what became the Janissaries. Again, I think you should have games with those themes, but I just think there's a lot of inconsistency in board gaming about historical themes. So again, I'm against colonialism, against imperialism, but I think it's an interesting theme, and I think there's a lot of lessons we can learn from it. And if a board game, which is supposed to be something fun, gets you to do some reading, read some primary sources, do some critical thinking, I think then it's a good thing. And I don't think you can do that if you erase the theme. And again, if you've done the research and you think the East India Company is the worst thing ever, which, again, you can make the case for, then I say don't buy the game. It's that simple. Anyway, this is the Shogunstein Historical Perspective, East India Companies. Shogunstein out.